Picture this. It is the middle of the night in the fall of 1999.
Okay.
A husband and wife have just come home from a local high school football game. But that typical Friday night routine, it's completely shattered.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They are locked in their bathroom, like as far away from their sleeping daughters as possible. The husband is standing there holding cell phone records. He is demanding the truth.
That is, I mean, that's incredibly tense.
It really is. And after hours of this grueling interrogation, the confession finally pours out. And it doesn't just shatter their marriage, it threatens to bring down what would become a massive family empire.
It's the absolute definition of a foundational collapse, right?
Yeah.
Everything they thought they knew about each other just vanishes in a single moment.
Exactly. So, welcome to our deep dive. If we had a bold headline for today's story, it would literally be Duck Dynasty's Alan Robertson found out his wife had an affair, then he did this.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking at today.
We are exploring the really painful, highly publicized, and ultimately redemptive story of Alan and Lisa Robertson.
Right, from the reality show.
Right. And we are pulling from a pretty diverse stack of sources for this one. We've got their really intimate interview on the Sadie Robertson Huff YouTube channel, deep dive articles from Focus on the Family and Bollywood Shotties, insights from their own ministry website, and some really interesting discussions from the Takidia Forum.
And our mission for you today is to really unpack the mechanics of survival here. We're looking at a couple facing the ultimate betrayal, a 14-month extramarital affair.
14 months.
Right.
Yeah.
But they didn't just survive the blast radius. They radically rebuilt their entire marriage from the ground up. So we're going to map out the deep psychological roots of this crisis.
And it's such a wild journey that it is actually the subject of a Lifetime movie premiering in May 2026 called Faith and Forgiveness.
Which is huge.
It is. But to really understand that explosion in the bathroom in 1999, we have to rewind the tape considerably. The setup of their relationship is, well, it's almost aggressively quaint.
How so?
So they met as teenagers in a McDonald's parking lot in West Monroe, Louisiana. He was 17, she was 15.
Oh, wow. Super young.
Yeah, practically kids. And by 1984, they are married.
And during their first 6 months of marriage, they actually lived in the front bedroom of Al's grandparents' house.
Right.
They literally fell asleep every night to the sound of those grandparents fiercely snoring 2 rooms over.
Oh my God.
I know, it sounds like this perfect, idyllic Southern romance on the surface.
But underneath that charming surface, Lisa was carrying like a crushing amount of invisible weight. In the sources, she uses this metaphor of a suitcase of trauma, which I think is such a visceral way to describe it.
Yeah, the suitcase metaphor really does a lot of heavy lifting here. Lisa explains that when people get married, there is this unspoken assumption that the wedding ring basically acts as an eraser.
Right, like a magic wand.
Exactly. You take all your past trauma, your abuse, terrible decisions, and you pack them tightly into a mental suitcase, and you just shove it under the bed. You hope the baggage stays shut.
But it never does it?
No, of course not. The reality of human psychology is that trauma does not just vanish because you change your last name. And Lisa's suitcase was practically bursting at the seams from the very beginning.
Yeah, according to the sources, Lisa was molested by an uncle starting when she was just 7 years old.
Oh, man, that's awful.
It is, and when a child experiences that kind of violation from a family member, they're forced into a corner where survival literally means secrecy. She felt she couldn't tell anyone.
Right.
So at 7 years old, she was fundamentally rewired to live a life of complete dishonesty. She essentially learned how to construct and wear a mask every single day.
And if we look at the psychological mechanics of that, early childhood abuse often conditions the victim to believe that their own boundaries just don't exist.
Yeah.
And they start to think their primary value is simply to appease the people around them. She openly admitted she internalized this belief that her only real purpose was to please men. Add to that the fact that she had an abortion at age 16. So by the time she is standing at the altar with Al, she isn't actually looking for a partner to build a life with.
Right, she's looking for an escape.
Exactly. She is looking for a knight in shining armor to rescue her from this overwhelming darkness that she's terrified to even name.
But the tragic irony here is that Al was entirely unequipped to be anyone's knight. I mean, he had massive blind spots of his own.
Oh, absolutely.
He became a pastor, serving for 22 years at his church. He was traveling the world on mission trips, pouring all of his energy into outward-facing ministry, but completely neglecting the people inside his own home.
It's a really common, honestly devastating paradox in ministry, or really any highly public service profession.
Yeah.
You give the absolute best parts of yourself to the crowd, and then you bring this exhausted, hollowed-out version of yourself home to your family.
Exactly. And Al left Lisa profoundly isolated with their 2 young daughters, Anna and Alex. And even when he was physically present, he wasn't emotionally engaged at all.
No, not really.
He would frequently leave his wife and kids to go over to his parents' house, just hang out with his dad, and watch Johnny Carson and David Letterman. He was essentially operating like a single guy who just happened to have a family tucked away nearby.
And we also have to factor in that Al had cheated on Lisa before they were even married,
Right.
which is huge.
So the concrete they are pouring for the foundation of this marriage is already completely full of cracks. When you ignore structural damage like that, it is only a matter of time before the pressure causes a visible fracture.
And that visible fracture happened in 1989.
Yeah. Lisa engaged in an emotional, non-sexual relationship with a coworker. It definitely crossed romantic lines. But when Al found out, the way they handled it is basically a masterclass in how to guarantee a future disaster.
Oh, for sure.
They didn't dig into the root causes at all. They didn't ask, what was missing in the marriage that made Lisa susceptible to outside attention in the first place. Al essentially wielded his authority to just shut the whole conversation down. He offered this conditional forgiveness that was laced with an ultimatum. He flat out threatened her with divorce if it ever happened again.
Right.
He didn't want to do the messy work of interrogating his own neglect, so he just used fear to sweep the whole thing under the rug.
And an ultimatum in that context is not a solution. It's just a control tactic. It forces the secret-keeping behavior even deeper underground.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
They managed to function on the surface. They took care of their ministry, they raised their kids, but they were actively starving their marriage.
Imagine building a beautiful house right over a sinkhole. You paint the walls, you mow the lawn, you hang up all these nice family photos. It looks perfect to the neighbors.
Right, picture perfect.
But underneath, the limestone is rapidly washing away day by day. You can't realistically ignore that structural damage forever. Eventually, the ground simply gives way.
And for Alan and Lisa, the ground gave way almost exactly 10 years later. In 1999, Lisa reconnected with an old boyfriend and began a 14-month physical affair.
And that's not even the wildest part. The psychological toll this double life took on her is staggering to read about. She felt so completely trapped by her own deceit that she would drive over a local bridge in Monroe, Louisiana, and actively contemplate driving her car right off the edge.
That detail really highlights the absolute prison of a double life. The cognitive dissonance of being a pastor's wife while carrying on a 14-month affair, it creates this intense psychological pressure cooker.
Absolutely.
She thought that if she drove off that bridge, no one would ever find out the truth. She wouldn't have to face the fallout or the shame. Secrecy is incredibly isolating. It creates this distorted reality where dying feels like a more viable, logical option than simply telling the truth.
But the truth has a funny way of demanding to be heard. Al gets suspicious. He pulls those late 90s cell phone records.
Oh, boy.
And we find ourselves right back in that bathroom after the Friday night football game. The confrontation.
They refer to this moment now as Lisa's truth vomit.
It's such an intense phrase, but honestly incredibly accurate for the mechanics of a confession that's been suppressed for a whole decade.
Yeah.
It took hours of Al interrogating her. She was terrified that if she told the truth, he would leave her immediately. But he told her he was leaving if she didn't tell the truth.
He really backed her into a corner.
He trapped her in a corner where the only exit was through the reality of her actions. So the dam finally breaks.
And after she confesses everything, there is this visceral moment where Lisa looks into the bathroom mirror. She told the Sadie Robertson Huff podcast that she literally did not recognize the person staring back at her.
Wow.
The mask she had meticulously constructed and worn since she was 7 years old had finally just melted away under the heat of the interrogation. But without the mask, she had no idea who she actually was.
Yeah.
Complete identity dissolution.
And the immediate consequence is exactly as severe as she feared. Al tells her she has to leave the house that night, and she cannot take their daughters. She steps out of the back door of her house, and she just collapses into the grass in her backyard.
If you strip away the TV fame, the money, the eventual empire, because none of that existed yet anyway, right?
Like they were just normal people then.
Look at the raw human elements of that moment in the grass. Lisa has lost her husband, her children, her home, and her standing in her community.
Yeah.
She is completely exiled. She later said she wished she could dig into the dirt just to hide under the earth.
Hold on, I'm trying to put myself in her shoes here. She's lost absolutely everything that defines her life. Her kids, her husband, her reputation. It's all gone in the span of a few hours.
Everything.
Logically, that is the exact moment a human being breaks completely. So how on earth does someone find the willpower to pivot in that scenario instead of just staying in the dirt?
It definitely defies our standards logic, but rock bottom paradoxically provides a solid foundation.
Oh, so?
When the sinkhole finally caves in, the terrifying anxiety of the freefall actually stops. There is nothing left to hide. The suitcases have burst open on the lawn, so to speak.
Right.
For Lisa, that sudden, devastating absence of secrets was, ironically, the first time she had been completely unburdened since she was 7 years old. The worst had happened, and she was still breathing.
And in her memoir, she describes that moment in the dirt as a profound spiritual turning point.
Yeah.
She admits she wasn't even sure she believed God was real at that point, given everything she'd done. But she cried out for help. And according to her account, she experienced a profound physical sensation of being picked up and held. She describes hearing the words, "You have me, I'm yours, and you are mine."
Looking at her experience, that moment provided a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It gave her an anchor of intrinsic value.
Yeah, that makes sense.
She realized that even if her marriage was permanently over, even if she never got her old life back, she wasn't just a shattered reflection in a bathroom mirror. She had worth outside of her ability to please the men around her.
And that realization clearly sparked something incredibly radical. Because she doesn't stay in the dirt, she gets up, and her actions the very next morning are mind-blowing.
Completely unexpected.
It's Sunday morning. Her husband is a pastor at White's Ferry Road Church. And instead of running away to her parents' house, which, by the way, she refused to do because she didn't want to admit defeat to a mother who had always doubted their marriage, Lisa goes to the church.
We really need to contextualize the scale of this. This is not some tiny anonymous gathering. This is a congregation of about 1,000 people.
Right. And in many evangelical churches, there is a portion of the service at the end called a response time or an altar call, where congregants are invited to come to the front for prayer or to make a public confession.
Yeah.
Lisa walks right down the center aisle during that response time. She is holding a handwritten letter of confession, and she hands it over to the church leadership, laying every single detail out in front of the entire room.
And while she's doing this, Al is at home. He is so fundamentally broken he cannot even get off the couch.
Right, he was devastated.
He had spent the morning wrapped in a blanket in a state of clinical shock. But looking back, he realized that Lisa's walk down that aisle was an act of almost unbelievable strength.
Oh, absolutely.
She could have tried to manage the PR. She could have quietly begged the church leadership to handle it behind closed doors.
It makes you realize that secrecy and shame are basically in a symbiotic relationship. By walking down that aisle, she wasn't just apologizing. She was essentially weaponizing radical transparency to kill the shame. Is that why it worked?
That is precisely the mechanism. Shame thrives in the dark. It convinces you that you are uniquely, irredeemably broken.
Yeah.
By dragging her darkest secret into the blinding light of 1,000 people, Lisa actively rejected the mechanism of hiding she learned at age 7. She disarmed the shame by taking away its power to control her narrative.
Because there's nothing left to hide.
Right. If everyone already knows the worst thing about you, there is nothing left for them to hold over you.
We have to be very clear, though. This was not a magic fix.
No, not at all.
This isn't a movie where they hug at the altar and the credits roll. The actual work of rebuilding a foundation from the rubble is brutal.
Al emphasizes this heavily in their focus on the family interview. He points out that asking a betrayed spouse to immediately forgive is like telling someone who just lost their partner to hurry up and get over it.
Oh, that's a powerful comparison.
It is a profound psychological loss. You are losing your trust, you are losing the history you thought you had, and you are losing the future you planned. It requires genuine, messy grieving.
So they separated. Lisa moved in with her best friend, Paula, across the street, and they entered into intense, grueling professional counseling.
Yeah.
Lisa had to completely rewire her behavior. She had to learn how to establish boundaries, which, is incredibly difficult for an abuse survivor who was taught she didn't own her own body. She had to learn how to communicate without wearing a mask.
And Al had to confront his own ego. He had to make the agonizing choice to actively forgive.
Right.
He managed that by drawing on his own past, remembering the grace Lisa had shown him for his infidelity before they were married. He had to look in his own mirror and recognize his culpability in neglecting his wife for 15 years while he played the hero for his congregation.
Wow.
They both had to let the old, toxic marriage die so they could build a completely new one.
They spent months in that crucible. And in December of 1999, they held a private vow renewal ceremony. They committed to the new foundation, and the proof that this bedrock actually holds is in the longevity. They have now been married for 42 years.
They didn't just rebuild their house and lock the doors either. They turned their relationship into a sanctuary for others.
Yeah, the sources mention this.
They essentially became the 9/11 for couples in their community who were facing infidelity.
Yeah.
People would come to them, and sometimes spouses would confess affairs in front of Al and Lisa for the very first time, entirely because they knew the Robertsons had survived that exact same fire.
They took the darkest, most shameful chapter of their lives and forged it into a blueprint for healing. And that foundation of absolute trust. It was tested again very recently in 2024.
Right.
Lisa found a lump, went through testing, and was diagnosed with breast cancer.
And Al, the guy who used to abandon his young, isolated wife to go watch late-night TV at his parents' house, stepped up in a massive way.
He really did.
He served her through an 11-hour surgery and a grueling recovery process. Lisa has stated she had never felt his commitment and love more profoundly than during that medical crisis.
It perfectly illustrates the shift from a marriage built on codependency, ultimatums, and hidden trauma to a true partnership built on mutual sacrifice and radical honesty.
Absolutely.
It is no wonder this story is being adapted from their memoir, A New Season, into a Lifetime film. The narrative arc is stunning, but the weight of it comes from the fact that it is entirely real.
Robertson's story stands as undeniable proof that the easy out isn't the only option when the absolute worst happens in a relationship.
Yeah.
True reconciliation is agonizing. It demands painful honesty. It demands looking in the mirror and acknowledging the stranger staring back at you. It means pulling out those suitcases you've shoved under the bed for decades and finally unpacking the trauma inside, piece by piece.
It is the grueling, unglamorous work of choosing to stay in the room and fix the sinkhole when every instinct is screaming at you to run away.
Right.
We live in a culture right now that is incredibly quick to cancel. We are constantly encouraged to walk away, to cut ties, to block and delete the very first sign of a profound mistake or betrayal.
It is certainly the path of least resistance.
But if the darkest, most painful betrayals, the kind that shatter you in a bathroom in the middle of the night, can eventually be transformed into a blueprint that actually heals other people, what might we be losing when we choose to just walk away?
That's a great question.
If we never patch the sinkhole, if we just abandon the house entirely, do we miss out on the chance to build something genuinely unbreakable in its place? Something to think about.